I was so anxious and overwhelmed that it felt weird and wrong to be happy. I identified as an anxious person, a type A, a neurotic. How was I supposed to be laid back, happy, and carefree? I didn't know who I was without my mental health struggles. This kept me from progressing forward for many years until I heard the song Lemon Boy, which encapsulates this concept perfectly. Lemon Boy is a song written by the popular artist Cavetown, or Robbie Skinner. Skinner personifies mental illness as a character named Lemon Boy in the song Lemon Boy. The first few lines establish how Lemon Boy is introduced into Skinner's life, and they eerily mimic how mental illness is introduced into most people's lives as well. The first lines go, "There once was a bittersweet man, and they called him Lemon Boy. He was growing in my garden, and I pulled him out by his hair like a weed. And like weeds do, he only came and grew back again. So I figured this time I might as well let him be." For anyone with mental illness, when it first comes into our life, we hate that shit. We try to get rid of it as hard as we can. We suppress it, we ignore it, but eventually we realize we can't really do anything about it because like weeds, mental illness keeps on coming back over and over. So eventually we kind of accept it. And the line, "So I figured this time I might as well let him be," in my opinion, refers to when we start to actually go out and get help for mental illness. We go to a psychiatrist, we read up about mental illness, and we finally get officially diagnosed and understand what's going on. And it's at this point that the song starts to pivot from the initial direction you think it's going to take, with the lines, "Lemon Boy and me started to get along together. I helped him plant his seeds and we'd mow the lawn in bad weather. It's actually pretty easy being nice to a bitter boy like him. So I got myself a citrus friend." Now, why in the world would anyone like their mental illness? The reason for this is complicated, but the first thing that happens is when you do finally get diagnosed and you start researching stuff for the first time in your life, you feel validated. There's finally a name to all the weird stuff that you've been doing your whole life that you thought was just you being maybe lazy, being different. I know for me, when I got my BPD diagnosis, that explained my entire life so well, and especially twofold with ADHD. I finally no longer felt like a crazy person. And not only that, when I went online, I found dozens and dozens of other people who had the same exact stories I did. It was one of the first times in my life I felt like I wasn't alone. And as I went on these forums, as I learned more and more, as I learned coping strategies and tips, I started to fall in love with this label more and more. It's one of the nicest feelings in the world to finally be understood after years of blaming yourself for things that weren't your fault. So you start to have a citrus friend. One of the other things that Skinner hits on with the line, "And we'd mow the lawn in bad weather," is that unlike everything else around you, right? When you're mentally ill, you're constantly changing friends, constantly changing jobs, religions, lovers, whatever it is. Your life is a mess. It's chaotic. But the one thing that's always stayed constant after you get a diagnosis is the fact that you have a diagnosis. Having a diagnosis and a mental illness is one of the most stable, constant things in your life. And that's something you can kind of fall back on when we talk about that, kind of mowing the lawn in bad weather. Having that kind of comfort or stability of like, this is one thing about me that won't change. I know for me personally, that's actually helped me through a lot of tough times. Being able to identify as broken or as having borderline gives me a bit of relief and comfort when I can't really count on anything in my life to be that stable because of my actions. But it isn't all rainbows and unicorns, as the next few lines start to indicate. "But soon as bittersweet started to rub off on me. You think smelling like lemon zest would be pretty neat. I found out that my friends are more of the savory type, and they weren't too keen on compromising with a nice lemon pie." These lines hit especially close to home because they point out one of the most interesting things that happens. So for once you're getting validated online, you're finding so many stories about other people who've been through the same thing, right? And it feels great. But then you go home and you start talking to your friends and your family, and they give you this weird look. Unless they also have the same disorder, or if they've suffered from the same things, they start to subtly invalidate you. They might say things like, "Well, it isn't all just due to this mental illness. That's great that you have a diagnosis," but they'll give you weird looks and get tired of kind of hearing about it over and over from you. From their perspective, you're still really the same person, and this diagnosis doesn't change much. And you start to become way more aware of how often people have been invalidating you your whole life. And it becomes hard to take it when you know that their invalidation is now wrong because you've read online so many other people who have the same exact experiences as you. It starts to create distance in your life between the people who you love the most, because oftentimes those are the people who have shaped our mental illnesses more than anything else. In addition to that, mental illness can also start to kind of drive you away from people in other ways. With things like borderline and stuff like that, anger outbursts, getting moody, getting upset. A lot of anger and frustration can also come out at the fact that maybe people around you have caused some of these symptoms in your life. This can be especially true with family members or really long-lasting friends. You can also start to realize that people in your life are really feeding your mental illness, or you're only around because of your mental illness. I know for me with borderline, there's so many people I realized I was only around them because I was too scared to be alone. The more you learn about yourself, the more you grow, and the more you start to shed other people in your life. And slowly but surely, again, this label helps you kind of rise. It helps you get over a lot of difficulties insecurities and demons that you face. It helps you find newer people or communicate with the existing people in your life what your needs are and what you actually want and what would actually be helpful for you, because now you have a vocabulary to communicate it after you've been educated, gone to therapy, read stuff online. But then something scary starts to happen. You start to get better. And the thing is, you no longer identify with the people who you resonated with so much at the beginning of your mental health journey. You read online about people who are suffering from disorders and you no longer can relate to them because you've improved your life and you no longer are stuck in those same places. As you start to lose the disorder, you start to not be able to relate to all the friends that you've made because of the disorder, who you relate to and empathize with. It starts to become harder and harder to find a stable sense of identity when one of the biggest things that's been guiding you for years starts to be something that you let go of. We can see this in the lines, but what if I run out of fertilizer? What if the clouds run out of rain? What if lemon boy won't grow no longer? What if beaches dry of sugarcane? The metaphors here are very intentional in my opinion. We can look at the rain as uncontrollable factors in your life that you can't really do anything about. So this can be things like genetics, the way you were brought up, so on and so forth, that contribute to your quote unquote lemon boy growing. The fertilizer is similar to the rain, but it's a lot of the longer term factors in your life that are kind of caused by you. So this can be things like negative coping patterns that have a really strong grip on you. This can also be things like really bad core values or beliefs, distorted ways of thinking, so on and so forth. These are things that you can change, but they'll take a long time because they're very deep rooted in the ground. The sugarcane is a really interesting one. In my opinion, these are the negative coping mechanisms that we use on a day-to-day basis to make lemon boy taste quote unquote sweet. This is what makes it bearable to be able to have a mental illness for a long amount of time. This can be obvious things like drug use, risky driving, anything that gives you some sort of high that distracts you from how you're feeling in the present moment and allows you to experience a lot of the camaraderie and stuff like that that comes with suffering from a mental illness. This metaphor is extremely useful in understanding why it is so difficult to get rid of lemon boy. Because if we stop our negative coping mechanisms, the sugarcane, lemon boy is going to taste horrible. We won't be able to deal with our mental health condition on a day-to-day basis because it'll become unbearable. We could start with the fertilizer, but that takes an extremely long time to change. And the thing is, lemon boy will likely continue to grow for years to come. The rain we can't really do much about, except maybe move to a whole different location with a different climate. This takes a huge amount of effort and is very unlikely for a lot of people. So not only is it really hard to get lemon boy out of your life to begin with, lemon boy is one of the few people who has helped you make so many friends, discover a community, feel validated, so on and so forth, and been one of the only constants in your life that has helped you move forward. So you start to rationalize staying mentally ill. You start to tell yourself, I'll never be like those people who are just normal. I'll never be someone who gets better. That's just not in the cards for me. Oh well, the whales start to beach themselves. Tortoise shells tear away from their spines. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. This is one of the hardest parts to get through when you are actually recovering from a mental illness, because you don't realize that there's going to be a grieving period for lemon boy. Getting that initial diagnosis, getting some kind of help, and understanding more about yourself was one of the most empowering things you can really do when you have a mental health disorder. But letting go of that and stripping it from your identity becomes really hard, because oftentimes it really binds to who you are. I mean, it makes sense. A lot of these mental health disorders explain like 90% of the behaviors that you do that you never knew why you did. But becoming a core part of your identity is expected. And finding other people who can relate to you really well is extremely nice and fun. It's a really easy way to make friends. It's really eerily similar to drug addiction. Drug addiction is something that starts out making you feel really good, adding quite a bit to your life, helping you make friends, so on and so forth. But as time goes on and you realize you no longer really need the drug in order to cope with a lot of your problems, what was once working and once being a benefit to you is now something you can't let go. Drug addiction starts to destroy your life because whether you like it or not, you have to keep doing the thing in order to feel normal. So you keep justifying. Lemon boy and I, we're gonna live forever. Like Snuffkin and Little My, we'll get around wherever. It's actually pretty easy being nice to a bitter boy like him. And this last line, it's actually pretty easy being nice to a bitter boy like him, is where we see one of the biggest downfalls of this identity clinging. We start to use it to rationalize some of our worst behaviors. We tell ourselves, oh, I have borderline. These are parts of me that are just never gonna get better. I have ADHD. I'm never gonna be organized. I have depression. There's no way I'm gonna feel happy. We start to submit to a life where we're never gonna get better because it's a lot more comforting than doing the difficult, painful work of getting rid of lemon boy. And with all the benefits and perks that have come along with him, why wouldn't you stick with him? This is one of the hardest questions to answer for a lot of people. But usually the answer typically comes when they've hit rock bottom, when all of the benefits of lemon boy no longer outshadow a lot of the darkest parts of it. So how do you get to this point? It's really hard. There's no clear answer for anyone. The thing is, we all have to go on our own personal journey. And part of this personal journey is picking up lemon boy, having him as a friend, using him to get by, to grow and become a better person, and then eventually outgrowing him entirely. entirely. The grieving period for Lemon Boy is something that not a lot of people talk about, but it's one of the realest things that there is. I believe that more discussion needs to be had on this transition from being someone who's mentally ill to being someone who's a lot better and who can function in society and no longer have their mental illness dominate their life. There are ways though to get better. For me, it was finding something like YouTube where I can talk about a lot of my experiences and help other people. It was finding new friends, talking about music, and taking up a new identity, one in which I try to help and uplift people as much as possible. And I'm no longer the broken person. If I want to help people, I have to be strong. And that's been able to motivate me to change and to get better. And I hope that it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. I hope that this video helps and that it was interesting and maybe you learned a little bit more about yourself. Comment down below if you agree with this analysis or if there's anything else you might want to add. Thank you so much for watching and take care.